Welcome back to my channel. My name is Lou, and this is Literature with Lou. So today we're going to be reviewing La Belle Dame Sans Merci by John Keats. And I made a video about John Keats and his poem To Autumn. This is another poem of his, obviously. Personally, I think I like this better, simply just because it's a little longer and there's more that you can grasp from it. We're gonna do stanza by stanza, and let's get started. So, first stanza. Oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms, alone and palely loitering? The sedge has withered from the lake, and no birds sing. Okay, so we see here a little annotation. Sedge is a grass-like or rush-like plant that grows in wet areas. So let's go line by line. Oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms? So we see here, obviously, knight at arms. This is a return to the Middle Ages, which is very popular within Romantic poetry, especially with Keats. Alone and palely loitering. So the knight's alone and he's kind of just walking around. Pale, we should note this because this will come up later. The sedge has withered from the lake and no birds sing. So we know that birds are a very common romantic motif. And they usually indicate life. So here, no birds are singing and this plant has withered. So there's almost a lack of life. Oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms, so haggard and so woe-begone? The squirrel's granary is full and the harvest is done. So haggard, we know it's wild looking, and begone, to happen or occur, transpire. So let's go line by line. Oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms, so haggard and woe-begone? So like it's set up here with palely loitering. The knight's clearly not doing too well. The squirrel's granary is full and the harvest is done. So it seems here that we're at a point in time where maybe we're coming from fall into winter, because the squirrel has all of his food. He's ready for the winter. He's stocked up. The harvest is done. So they've prepared everything for the colder months. I see a lily on thy brow with anguish moist and fever dew. In thy cheeks a fading rose fast withereth too. So we're starting to see this paradoxical nature of the poem, because we see that lilies are obviously like this very beautiful flower, but they're mixed with anguish, moist, and fever dew. And I even think this right here, dew and fever being combined together, are very paradoxical. And thy cheeks a fading rose fast withereth too. So fading, rose. It's just kind of talking about perhaps this beauty that's also tied with pain. Obviously, paradoxes and sort of contradictory ideas are very common within Romantic poetry. I also think that these emotions being tied to rose and lily and fast withereth and dew are just connecting it back to nature, which is another common idea. I met a lady in the meads, full beautiful, a fairy's child. Her hair was long, her foot was light, and her eyes were wild. So meads, meadow, this is sort of an archaic term, I believe. So again, return to like an older time. I met a lady in the meads, full beautiful, a fairy's child. So we're connecting to the supernatural now. We've left this realm of the granary being the squirrel's granary and the harvest, and we're into this fairyland. Her hair was long, her foot was light, and her eyes were wild. So hair was long, and her foot was light, and her eyes were wild. She's kind of almost like rejecting norms. Like she's this beautiful, almost like we said, wild, with her hair being long, being. She's otherworldly. I made a garland for her head and bracelets too, and fragrant zone. She looked at me as she did love, and made sweet moan. So this, they're saying you should compare it to Ode to Psyche, but we're not reading that right now. I made a garland for her head and bracelets too, in fragrant zone. So he's making these garlands and bracelets out of presumably flowers. So this connection to nature again. And she looked at me as she did love. So it's important to note here this word as, because we don't get direct confirmation that the woman loves him. We just get this. She looked at him as if she did love, or as she did love. and made sweet moan. We don't even know what this sweet moan is. He's interpreting it as sweet. It could be a moan of, I don't know, distress. I set her on my pacing steed, and nothing else saw all day long, for sidelong would she bend and sing a fairy song. So singing a fairy song also just kind of brings us back to this point. It almost seems like she's speaking a different language, and we'll see that later on too. So I set her on my pacing steed, and nothing else saw all day long, for sidelong she bend and sing a fairy song. So he's completely enraptured with her. And I also think this pacing steed, but the woman is on it. It's kind of this mixing of two worlds. She found me roots of sweet, relish sweet, and honey wild and Manitou, and sure in language strange she said, I love thee true. Okay, again, it's like completely blatantly put here. He doesn't understand what she's saying. He is merely assuming that she's saying all of these things, because language strange, how does he know that she's saying I love thee true? Let's go back. And then we have honey wild and Manitou. So manna is this food of like the heavens. So it's almost like he's gotten this literal taste of another world. But let's go line by line. She found me roots of relish sweet. Again, this kind of like sweet. It's everything at this point seems very beautiful. And honey wild and Manitou, like I said, this world, this food of a different world. He's never tasted anything like this before. And sure in language strange, she said, I love thee true. And sure, I think is a very interesting word here, because I think it really highlights that he's just assuming. She took me to her elfin grot, and there she wept and sighed full sore, and there I shut her wild, wild eyes with kisses for. So here we see this elfin grot, which is, again, a sort of like archaic way of putting wherever she lives. And elf obviously is, I would assume in this sense, synonymous for fairy. So it's just another supernatural sort of thing. And she wept and sighed full sore. I think this line's very interesting because later on we'll see that the knight is abandoned by this woman, and some critics have thought that it's the woman's fault. She sort of seduced him, but I think this line proves otherwise. She doesn't, they can't really communicate, so he doesn't truly understand that she doesn't want this, at least in my opinion. And there I shut her wild, wild eyes. The fact that wild, wild is put twice, again, she's this otherworldly being. She's kind of like different than anything else he's seen before, with kisses for. So he's kind of almost like forcing her to calm down, which you can think about however you wish. And there she lulled me asleep, and there I dreamed, ah, woe betide, the latest dream I ever dreamt on the cold hillside. So she's lulling him to sleep, and he's dreaming now. We don't really need to close read these lines. I saw pale kings and princes too, pale warriors, death pale were they all. They cried, La Belle Dame Sans Merci, thee hath in thrall. So we see this again, pale, like I said, will be very important later on. It's right here, this is what I was talking about. So these other kings and princes, much like the knight, have kind of been left for dead by this woman, supposedly, and they've been left pale. And I tend to think of this as they no longer have that Manitou, they no longer have this access to the supernatural, so they kind of like lose perhaps maybe like the glow they had, like this kind of glow that radiates from the supernatural, and it's kind of like stripped away from them, so they look pale. But that's just an opinion. Pale warriors, death pale were they all, death pale, equating this like loss of this woman to death. They cried, La Belle Dame Sans Merci, which basically means the woman without mercy, I think. The hath thee in thrall. So the woman without mercy has you in her grip, I guess. I saw their starved lips in the gloam, with horrid warning gaped wide, and I woke and found me here on the cold hillside. So gloam means twilight, and Keats coined the word from gloaming. So I saw their starved lips in the gloam. Starved, again, this is returning to that idea of Manitou. no longer do they have access to the supernatural or this literal food that's kind of provided them with their like maybe their glow. Now they're pale. They've been starved. With horrid warning gaped wide, and I awoke and found me here on the cold hillside. So we have, in my mind, we have this like really big color switch. Like I am picturing greens and pinks, and now we're in this like muted pale coloring that it's much less desirable, obviously. It's almost like we have been starved of Manadu reading this. And this is why I sojourn here, alone and palely loitering, though the sedge is withered from the lake and no birds sing. So sojourn is obviously to just like stay and visit. So it's just kind of like to remain there. So he can't leave. That's what I get from the word sojourn in this situation. He can't leave. He's alone and palely loitering, and though everything has died around him, there's no sign of life with this line right here. He can't leave. So it's almost like he has become one of these pale warriors. So overall, I think this poem is you can take it as what you can kind of take it and think about it however you like. I like to think of it in a more modern context and kind of apply it to our current situations with consent. I think it's a very interesting reading, very interesting contemporary reading. Obviously, we have no clue if Keats meant anything by this. I think it's probably safe to say that that's not what he was thinking, just considering the times, but it is a interesting perspective to take on. I also think the return to the Middle Ages is a very, very interesting concept because this reminds me a lot of Marie de France's Lanval, where he falls in love with a fairy, but she ends up saving him. So it's a very, very different outcome. But like in the same situation where he's kind of this woman just kind of shows up out of nowhere and she's like no one he'd ever seen, and he's kind of taken to an almost like pseudo elfin grot. So it's kind of interesting to note those comparisons. But yeah, thank you for reading this with me, and thank you for hearing me rant about my modern interpretations, and I'll see you guys next time.